Chapter 20. Stepping out into the bright light of day, traces of smog and exhaust fumes hit them at the same time. Coughing lightly at the sudden presence of the noxious gases, they waved down a passing taxi. Entering the cinnamon-scented cab, they took a deep breath, clearing their lungs of the foul air. Lexie pulled out the postcard and pointed to the address listed on it. The driver nodded and pulled into traffic after inputting the address into the GPS mounted in his dash. Their route lit up the screen, letting them know they would be in the cab for a while. Jay took his bag from his lap and set it on the floor between his legs. Glancing over as Lexie did the same with hers and then set her purse on the seat between them. Her eyes were focused on the window, watching as they drove through the city. "I'm sorry for last night. I just couldn't keep it in anymore," Lexie said as her attention shifted to Jay. "It's fine, Lexie. You never need to apologize to me for being there." He briefly grabbed her hand and squeezed. "I'm glad I was able to be there for you. I haven't been able to be there for you for a long time now. Besides, being able to help you and talk to you like we used to helped me a lot as well last night. I wasn't doing the best of jobs, keeping myself under control. It was a close thing, there for a bit. Talking to you and being around you helps." Jay's voice was full of regret as he spoke. Lexie thought that regret might have more to do with what he had said at the end than anything else he had mentioned. "I'm glad that we could be there for each other then," she agreed with a smile. "I've missed you, Jay, more than you will ever know." Regret filled her own voice as she whispered softly. Jay heard her though, and he felt the same way. It was too bad there was nothing he could do for her now. There was too much going on that was unknown. He couldn't afford to act rashly now and have it end up hurting her later. He never wanted to be the cause of her pain. Jay moved his hand between them, resting it on top of her purse, palm up. Lexie's hand slowly inched across and rested in his as they linked eyes for a second before turning their attention to the city, passing them by. They enjoyed the company that each provided, keeping their hands together for the rest of the trip. The taxi stopped in front of a house and Jay climbed out first. He held a hand out behind him to stop Lexie from doing the same. "Hold on, I don't want the taxi leaving us behind if no one is here. I'll come back if there is someone at home. Is that all right?" He asked her to make sure she understood and was fine with his actions. Lexie nodded and she settled back into the seat, leaving the door open as Jay ran to the house. The driver looked at her questioningly. In turn, she held up her hand with her index finger extended, letting him know that they would only be a minute. Nodding himself, the driver turned his head forward and relaxed while he waited. Jay ran up the path and found himself in front of an old sprawling house. Most of it had been hidden by the large trees that ringed the property and prevented them from getting a good look from the street. A large door loomed before him with a button on the side for the doorbell. The size of the door almost caused him to overlook it as he raised his hand to knock. Hand raised, he froze as he spotted the button. Awkwardly shifting, he lowered his arm and pushed the doorbell. The reverberating sounds of a chime reached his ears as he stepped back from the door, waiting. A voice called out in German from the inside of the house. Unable to respond in German himself, he said nothing, choosing instead to wait. He didn't have to wait long as the door opened in front of him, revealing a pretty woman wearing a paint-smudged smock, one hand clasping the fabric. Her hand loosened, revealing paint on the tips of her fingers as she looked him over. "Hi, do you speak English?" Jay asked when she didn't say anything. "Yes, I do, though it has been some time since I have spoken it with anyone outside of my husband," she replied in a thick accent, her French homeland obvious as she spoke. Jay's eyes widened as he heard her speak, knowing that this was who they had come to see. "Can you hold on, please? There is someone I need you to meet and talk to." Waiting for her to nod, he turned and ran down the path and back to the waiting taxi and to Lexie. Seeing him running toward her and the smile full of excitement on his face, Lexie quickly paid the driver and climbed out with their bags in her hand. "There's a woman here and she's clearly from France. I think she is one of the neighbors." he told her excitedly as he took his bag from her, slinging it onto his shoulder and taking her now free hand. Pulling her along behind him, they hurried up the path. Jay's body was preventing her from seeing the house full on, and consequently, prevented the lady at the door from seeing her. Jay stepped to the side as they reached the door, allowing Lexie to fully see the lady for the first time. Lexie watched as she paled and slowly sank to her knees in front of them. "Michelle?" she whispered across from them. Lexie rushed to her and knelt in front of her, taking her hand. "No, I'm not Michelle, I'm her daughter." "Alexis," the woman muttered as wonder filled her voice, a little color returning to her cheeks. Lexie rose to her feet, pulling the woman up beside her. "I go by Lexie now, but yes. I was told that you were friends with my parents." "Yes, I was. My husband and I lived next to them for just over 3 years before the..." She stopped as she realized what she was about to say, her cheeks reddening. "The fire. It's all right, it's not like I remember it, or them." Lexie's voice trailed off as she thought of her parents. She came to her senses as the woman stepped back. "What am I doing? I seem to have lost my senses. Please do come in. My name is Renee." Stepping back from the door, she motioned for them to enter. Guiding them into the back of the house where she had been painting, she took their jackets and bags from them, setting them in a closet next to the door. "If you'll hold on just a minute while I put away the paint I was using and wash my brushes, I'll prepare us a snack and some tea, and we can talk." She bustled about the room, putting her paint away and sticking her brushes in a cup. Jay and Lexie stood at the entrance to the room and watched as she put everything away. The wall of the room was covered in paintings. She had done some of everything. There were landscapes and portraits, caricatures, and even what appeared to be interpretive pieces of well-known art. "Are these all yours?" Jay asked, stepping closer to a wall staring at what appeared to be an interpretation of the Son of Man painting by René Magritte. The iconic apple and bowler hat were there, but the lines were cleaner with more detail woven in. "Yes, they are. What do you think of them?" Renee watched as they looked over her work, noting when their eyes moved quickly and when they slowed in turn. "Well, I don't know a lot about art as a technical subject, but I like what I see here." "You are very good," Lexie told her simply as she stood next to Jay, who had stopped at the same painting as before. Jay kept his mouth closed, merely nodding in agreement with Lexie's words. "Thank you, I mainly paint for myself and my husband, though I do sell the excess on occasion. They do take a lot of room after all." She smiled and stepped from the room, waiting for them to follow her. She led them to the kitchen, where she set her brushes beside the sink. Taking a pot from her stove, she filled it with water and set it back on the stovetop, turning it and the oven on as she did so. "For now I'll let the brushes soak, and then I'll clean them properly later when I have the time," she explained as she left the brushes in the cup, but filled it with water. Jay and Lexie stood back as she moved about the kitchen, pulling out ingredients as she went. "Is there anything we can help you with?" Jay asked, feeling more than a little useless just standing there. "Oh no, you are my guests. Please sit down and relax." She indicated the stools at the counter and continued with her prep work. Sitting down at the proffered seats, they twisted around to watch as Renee moved about her kitchen, finally stopping in front of the stove as the pot began whistling with steam. Taking the pot off the burner, she set it to the side as she pulled out some mugs and tea bags. "Sorry, I only have one kind of tea right now, is that all right?" she asked as she held the bags in her hand. "That's all right, I don't mind. Whatever you have is fine with me as well," Jay and Lexie answered in turn. Renee smiled as she placed the tea bags in the mugs and filled each with hot water from the pot. Carefully picking up the mugs, she placed each on the counter in front of them before she went back to her cooking. Mixing everything together, she slid it all into a casserole pan and stuck it in the oven. Setting the timer, she brushed her hands on her paint smock and sat down on the last stool in front of the counter. Taking the mug of tea that she had set there earlier, she wrapped her hands around it and slowly twisted it around. Sorry for the wait. Now what can I help you with? Lexie took a sip from her mug, rolling the last of the hot liquid on her tongue before letting it fall down her throat. We've come to find out about my parents. I need to know what happened back then, and I need to know about the boy that was living with us. More importantly, I need to know whether or not my father really had an affair. Her pleading voice growing heated at the end. Renee stood, leaving her steaming mug on the counter. I should call my husband and let him know that he needs to come home immediately. What you want to know is best told by the both of us. She left the room, leaving them to look at the now empty doorway, matching expressions of concern lining their faces. Do you think we need to be worried? Lexie asked softly. She said she's calling her husband, but do you think she could also be contacting someone else as well? I don't know, Jay answered back just as softly. She seems to be a nice woman. I don't think she would willingly hurt the daughter of a professed friend. Let's play it by ear and be careful. Either way, she knows something, and we need to hear what it is. Renee hurried back into the room, her cell phone in hand. Sitting down, she set the phone to the side and picked back up her mug of tea. Sorry about that. I'll answer what I can before he gets here, but most of what you want to know should be told by him. Your father and John, my husband, they talked about the affair extensively. She raised her hands, putting quotes in the air as she said affair. I will say that there was no affair. Your father loved your mother more than anyone except perhaps you. A smile was on her face as her eyes lost focus, remembering the days before the fire. Lexie's hand went to her mouth and Jay's hand to her shoulder, squeezing gently at the news that there had been no affair after all. Thank you for telling me that. Tears were in her eyes as she thanked Renee for telling her what she had wanted to know the most. Renee's eyes refocused on them as Lexie spoke. I am glad that I was able to set your mind at ease. It seemed like it was something that was disturbing you greatly. It really was. I only have a few photographs of them from when they were younger, and no memories of them. Having the idea, no, that's not quite right. Lexie struggled to find the right word. Image? Jay offered helpfully. That works. Having the image of my parents that I've constructed over the years, of my father do something like that, it was disturbing and nothing like what I thought I knew of them. Lexie's eyes glimmered with unshed tears as she looked deeply into her mug of tea. Renee stood and wrapped Lexie in a hug. I think I have some photos of them, and you as well, around here somewhere. If you would like, I could try to find them later. I can send copies of them to your house as well? She offered warmly. I would like that a lot. Thank you. Lexie sniffled lightly as the tears that she had been holding back began to slide freely down her lightly tanned cheeks. Your parents were our best friends. Our close ages helped us bond right away. I remember the day they moved in and the day that you were born. Your parents were so happy and excited to welcome you into their lives. I remember that they were sad that they could not contact their family back in America. I never did understand why they were unable to, but I assumed it was for personal reasons at the time. Renee released Lexie slowly before running her hand through Lexie's short hair affectionately. Lexie nodded. It was. I live with my aunt and grandfather now, and from what they've told me, they hadn't heard from my parents in years before the fire. She swallowed before continuing. Her throat was suddenly swollen with emotion. In fact, they only knew I had been born when they found out my parents were dead. I wish we could have been there for you when it happened. We were at a gallery here in Germany at the time. They wanted to showcase my work and flew us over to talk over everything. Renee explained sadly as she backed away from Lexie and sat back down. You wouldn't have been able to do anything, Lexie disagreed with a shake of her head. They wouldn't even let Grandpa see me until he had proven that he was a direct relation. Renee considered what Lexie had told her before sighing and taking a sip of her tea. Perhaps you are right. The sound of a car pulling into their garage reached their ears. Renee stood and walked over to the stove. Taking the teapot to the sink, she refilled it before setting it on the stove and turning on the heat. Pulling out a mug and a bag of tea, she turned to them. I did not think he would make it back this quickly. Renee, is everything all right? A near-frantic voice echoed through the house, accompanied by the sound of a door closing. The phrase was quickly repeated in French. In here, honey. Renee called back affectionately. We like to keep up our English with each other, otherwise we would have forgotten everything. She explained to them. A man they assumed to be her husband, John, rushed into the room, stopping when he saw Jay and Lexie sitting at the counter. What is going on? You made it sound like something was wrong. I rushed home as quickly as I could. He moved to his wife's side and wrapped an arm around her waist, his eyes focused on Lexie. Is that? Renee followed his eyes. This is Alexis, Michelle and Adam's daughter. John's eyes grew conflicted at what she had said. But I thought she died. You did? Lexie asked, looking at Renee questioningly. We both did, actually. That is part of the reason you surprised me so much when you appeared. After the fire, we never heard anything about you again. When we came back from Germany, all anyone would tell us is there had been a fire, and that your parents were dead. All they would tell us about you was that you had been taken to the hospital with them. We assumed the worst when we never heard anything more. Renee explained, her arm wound around her husband's waist, pulling him close. John stood there, his eyes never leaving Lexie's face, starting in surprise when the teapot began to whistle behind him. Renee released her husband and pushed him towards the door. Go put your coat away and meet us in the sitting room to talk. We will bring the tea and the food, she announced as the timer counted down the last few seconds and began making an annoying buzzing noise. John removed his coat and loosened his tie as he left the room. Renee bent over the door of the oven as she opened it and pulled out the hot casserole dish. Setting it on the top of the stove, she set her oven mitts to the side and quickly turned everything off. Renee dished the casserole out onto plates quickly before grabbing 2 of them and walking out of the room. Jay and Lexie looked at the remaining plates before grabbing them and followed her as quickly as they could. They wanted to be helpful, regardless of what she had said earlier. It felt wrong to just stand there and watch her do everything,